We welcome back tonight Facebook Chief Operating Officer Sheryl Sandberg, who has been on this stage twice before, the first time in 2013, discussing her worldwide bestseller Lean In with Google Executive Chairman Eric Schmidt, and then in 2014 when she turned the tables on Eric and Google's Jared Cohen to interview them about their bestseller, The New Digital Age. We learned in the process, no surprise, that Sheryl Sandberg is one of the sharpest and most insightful questioners around, and tonight she brings with her a very special guest to discuss another very special book. Adam Grant is a prolific writer, a frequent columnist for the New York Times, among others, and when he's not doing that, he's brilliantly performing his day job on the faculty of the Wharton Business School. He's very good at that, too. He's been named Wharton's top-rated teacher for 4 straight years. In 2013, Adam gave us his first book, Give and Take, where he examined why we often do better ourselves when we help others succeed. It's been translated into 27 languages and has won a slew of accolades. Adam has followed that up with his current bestseller, Originals. In it, he asks and answers some provocative questions. What does it take to be original? Why are some people so much better at it than others? How do you become a champion for great original ideas, and how do you have them yourself? Adam is here tonight to discuss these and many more provocative points in Originals, and we're delighted to welcome him to the museum for the first time. Please join me in saying hello to Adam Grant and Sheryl Sandberg.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sheryl.
Well, I am excited to be back. Very much home court for me and everyone else here, and I think increasingly for Adam, who's been spending more and more time advising companies like Facebook in the Valley with all of the great work he's done. So we're excited to get started. So join me in welcoming the great Adam Grant to Silicon Valley and the Computer History Museum.
Thanks.
And the only thing I will add to his bio, because there are 2 things that were not yet mentioned because there's so much to say about Wharton's highest rated professor, is Adam was also a junior Olympic springboard diver. And if you go into YouTube and search Adam Grant, you can watch him. It's incredible. He flips, he turns, he's not speaking, there's no classroom involved. He was also a professional magician. And amongst his many other talents, he has taught my children several magic tricks, which I still can't figure out and I'm grateful for. So this is a perfect place to talk about this book because Silicon Valley and this institution are about change and about innovation. And change and innovation is always defined by at least what we think of as an original idea or a new application of an old idea that makes it different and creates something new in the world. So what motivated you to write this book? Why Originals?
I'm still stuck on you watching diving videos in your spare time.
I have, and so many people here will join me, right? People are doing it right now, you can see.
No, I think what motivated me was, I guess early when I was just starting out in my career, I saw a manager basically scream at one of my colleagues. And I went over to try to defend him, and it was the first time I'd ever really spoken up. And I said, I think this is a bad idea, both because he's going to probably quit and because we really desperately need him, and it was also sort of not that pleasant, right? Yeah. And I ended up getting dragged by my ear into the women's bathroom by my boss's boss.
Literally? Like by the ear?
Yeah, literally by the ear. Yeah.
Wow.
And,
it's rough on the East Coast.
Yeah. I thought this was actually normal treatment, but I was told that if I ever spoke out of turn again, that I would be fired too.
I'm sorry, this was as a professor at Wharton?
No,
okay.
No.
Where was this?
Not sure I'm at liberty to say.
Okay,
but
an earlier job.
Yeah.
On the East Coast.
Much earlier.
Not in California.
No,
okay.
No, but
Thank
yeah,
God.
it was a little bit traumatizing at the moment. I basically walked away realizing a few things. One, I never wanted a real job where anyone could fire me, right? So this is why you try and go get tenure. And 2, I never ever wanted to be in a women's bathroom again. So.
Excellent goals.
No,
How are you doing on those 2?
Success
you
on
got
both.
tenure.
Yeah, no more women's bathrooms either. But No, I was really interested in how do you speak up effectively, and I was struck by the fact that tons of people have good ideas for how to improve the world around them, but never say anything about them because they're afraid of getting punished or they just don't think anyone will listen, and I wanted to know how we could all get better at that.
So how do we get better at that? Let's start with what's an original? What is an original?
An original, for me, is someone who has lots of creative ideas, but goes beyond just brainstorming and says, I'm going to try to make those a reality. So dreaming up a vision, but taking initiative to try to improve the world around you.
Give us examples of who are influential originals.
Not going to say Steve Jobs. Way too stereotypical. But people like Steve Jobs would qualify. No, I think about sort of 3 different kinds of prototypes. So one would be really creative visionaries and inventors. The Thomas Edisons of the world, any of the tech pioneers of the current era would probably fit. 2 would be social change agents, the suffragists, the civil rights activists. And then 3, I think, are people who often don't get the attention they deserve, which are people who are working behind the scenes to create real change. So people who threw away, for example, the old system of sharing information in the intelligence industry and said, we should actually use the internet for this. I think organizational change is an overlooked form of originality.
And if you had to name just a couple of influential originals who are working now, who are they? Put some names to that.
So I think if I were pushed, I would say J.K. Rowling is one of the greatest. Children's book was too long, apparently. I don't know about you, but I wanted it to be longer when I read Harry Potter. So
everyone did.
I think breaking that mold was pretty exciting. I'm a big fan of Seinfeld. I think it was a completely revolutionary TV show, and I think that you could call any of the creators originals. We could run through the list of Elon Musk, Jack Dorsey, Larry and Sergey, Mark, Sheryl. The list goes on and on.
Well, what's interesting about your first 2 examples is both J.K. Rowling and Seinfeld, so Harry Potter and Seinfeld were things that were broadly rejected, right? Seinfeld wasn't picked up because the characters were unlikable, the show was about nothing, and no one was going to watch it. And Harry Potter, the list of literary agents and publishing houses that said no to Harry Potter, I'm sure those people are quite displeased with their rejection. But it was very long because it was too long, too complicated. So both of those creative works experienced a lot of failure before success. Do you have to have failure before success? How important is that?
I don't think you have to have it before success, but I think it has to come at some point along the journey. So if you look at the data, the people who succeed the most as originals are the ones who fail the most, because they're the ones who try the most. Look at Edison. I think Edison is such a good example. Everyone knows the light bulb story, but what about the talking doll he invented, which was so creepy it scared not only kids, but adults too?
It is. When you're looking up his diving, look up the doll. Truly frightening. Truly frightening.
I've had nightmares
Horrible.
about this doll.
The doll's terrible.
It's terrifying. And he created that around the same time he was working on the light bulb. He also tried to mine magnets, which didn't work too well. He tried to create a fruit preservation technique that failed. And you see this in every domain. You see that Shakespeare wrote a bunch of plays that are considered duds. And he's like, yeah, but I wrote Hamlet and Macbeth, so I'm probably all right. But if you look at the data, you have to just generate a lot of volume of ideas in order to create variety and have a chance at doing something truly original.
And how do we do that? So if any of us are here and we go back to our offices or our schools or whatever, our homes tomorrow, and we say, I want to generate a whole bunch of original ideas in the hopes that one of them is, if not Macbeth, something that's truly original. What advice do you have? How do we generate more and more original ideas?
I think the starting point is to diversify your experience base. So everyone thinks you have to be the biggest expert, the 10,000 hours of practice in order to be original, but it's not those people who do the most. It's actually the people with the broadest knowledge. So Steve Jobs said 3 decades ago that if you want to be original, you have to have a different bag of experiences than everyone else. Now, the bag of experiences he chose is illegal in most states. But there is a point there, which is if you want to see the world differently, you have to go through experiences that other people haven't. So if you look at the world's most innovative fashion designers, you will see that what distinguishes them is they have more years not traveling abroad, not living abroad, but working abroad in countries different from their own.
And does it have to be working in fashion or working in anything?
It can be working in anything. It's just learning new cultural assumptions, different worldviews. So if you're American, like traveling to Canada is not going to help you much. It'll help Canada, so
Sorry,
go.
Tessa.
But I think also if you look at scientists, Nobel Prize-winning scientists, compared to their peers, are twice as likely to play a musical instrument, 7 times as likely to draw or paint, 12 times as likely to write fiction or poetry, and get this, 22 times as likely to perform as an actor, dancer, and yes, magician.
Wow. So in chapter 2, you talk about selecting new ideas. And you write, when we bemoan the lack of originality in the world, we blame it on the absence of creativity. If only people could generate more novel ideas, we'd all be better off. But in reality, the biggest barrier to originality is not idea generation, it's idea selection. So the idea, and you write about this eloquently in the book, is you can generate a lot of ideas, and that's the first step. But the second step is actually picking the right ones. What advice do you have after we all learn to write plays, travel to different countries, be musicians, all the different backgrounds you know, but what advice do you have on how to pick the right ideas?
So I'm going to borrow something I learned from an extraordinary former student, Justin Berg, who is probably here in this audience.
Justin?
Justin, are you here?
Oh,
he
welcome.
is here.
Here
Good.
he is.
So everyone ask Justin. He'll give you the answer later. No. So Justin's a professor at Stanford, and he did this brilliant research on idea selection. So he got circus artists, like think Cirque du Soleil, to submit videos of their performances and then try to predict which ones were going to take off. And circus artists are terrible at this. They think their own acts are way better than they really are, not surprisingly, especially the clowns, because everyone hates clowns, it turns out, even other clowns. But the other acts, there's a lot of variance, and most people are too positive on their own ideas. They fall in love with their own work. So then Justin turns to another group. He looks at managers and says, can the managers predict? Well, no, they're not very good either, because they're too negative. They're looking at all the reasons that new ideas might fail, instead of looking for reasons they might succeed. So who's good at this? It turns out peers, fellow creators, other circus performers. They have enough distance to say this act is really bad, but also, unlike managers, they're really motivated to see the potential in new ideas. And so I think we could all seek more feedback from our peers as one step.
And does that work for managers too? Are managers better at selecting the ideas of other managers that are the right ones?
I think that's a study waiting to be done. But what Justin found in a follow-up experiment was you could get the managers to be more open to novelty just by shifting their mindset. So right before they evaluate other people's ideas, just have them spend 5 minutes brainstorming about their own ideas. And then they get out of this sort of evaluative, I'm going to shoot your idea down mode, and into this, I'm looking at what ideas could take off mindset.
So once we generate lots of ideas with our various backgrounds and then judge and find the right ones, we have to communicate them. And that's obviously a big challenge, because challenging the status quo means we're challenging things. What advice do you have about how we challenge the status quo? Who speaks out effectively to challenge things, and how do they do it?
One of the mistakes that a lot of people make is when we have an idea, we go to our most agreeable friends. They're people who are polite and welcoming, they're nice, and we expect them to cheerlead for us. And they will, but they also really don't like rocking the boat. And so they're pretty conflict averse, and so they're like, yeah, great idea, and then that's the end of the conversation. The more disagreeable people, the critical, skeptical, challenging people we know, are much more likely to tear our idea apart in the spirit of trying to make it better. But if they believe in it, they will actually then stand up for us, right? They'll run through walls for our idea. So there was a Google programmer who put this beautifully. He said, a disagreeable person who's going to support you as a great ally is somebody with a bad user interface but a great operating system. If that helps
perfect.
you. Yeah, but those are the people that you want to go to with your ideas.
That's perfect. Well, friendship is a great topic to talk about with you. Adam is and has been an amazing friend in my life, and I've met so many of your former students and colleagues who say the same thing, that when people need you, you are always there. What's the role of friendship in generating ideas and selecting ideas and supporting the right communication?
I think we all need friends as allies. I think, though, that when it comes to bringing ideas to the table, sometimes your enemies are better supporters than your friends. Your friends are biased, right? Everyone knows that they're in your court and they're going to support you no matter what. If you can get someone who hates your guts to say, I really don't like you, but this is a decent idea anyway, that person is a totally credible supporter. And there's a third group that I think a lot of us look to more often than our enemies, which turns out to be a bad idea, which is frenemies. So, Sheryl, I know you have no frenemies, but for others in the audience, Those people that you have sometimes positive, sometimes negative interactions with, sometimes they are really friendly to your face and then stab you in the back. It turns out that the more of those that you have in your life, the worse your physical health is. It is literally physically unhealthy to maintain ties with your frenemies.
But it's OK. So the friends are good because they'll support us. And the enemies are good because they'll tell us the truth. And if they support us, they'll help the ideas come out.
Yeah, whereas these poor frenemies, it's just hard to predict them, right? You're always wondering, like, are you going to have my back or are you going to stab me? I don't really know. And so you expend a tremendous amount of emotional energy trying to figure out who they are. And I think we're better off not going to them with our ideas.
It's interesting because for those of you who read Adam's unbelievably great other book, Give and Take, you have a lot to say about givers and takers and the role that if you are a giver, having takers in your life plays. If you are a taker, having givers in your life plays. And being more thoughtful about how we select the people around us. So in this one, you write about a song tapping exercise that reveals something important about communicating original ideas. Who wants to see Adam do this? Can you show us?
I didn't raise my hand for that. Sure, I can show you. So I think this is one of the most important things I've ever learned about communicating new ideas. So we can all do this. Think of a song and tap it for the person next to you to recognize it. So you're going to go like that, and the other person's going to guess it. But before you do that, come up with a probability estimate for the odds that the person near you will recognize it.
All right.
OK, now go. All right, we're probably good.
All right. All right, did everyone get a chance? Should we do a poll? All right, raise your hand. OK.
Have them stand up if they guessed it right.
All right, everyone who guessed it correctly, stand up.
Stand up if you guessed it right.
Stand up if you guessed it right.
And stay standing
Where's
for a
Justin? Stand up if you guessed it correctly, and stay standing.
OK, when I name your song, you can sit. Happy birthday. Row, row, row your boat. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. ABCs. Jingle bells. Mary had a little lamb. We will rock you. Beethoven's Fifth. Good, I can't even tap the third. All right, what did you have that we didn't hear yet?
Yellow Submarine and Seven Nation Army.
All right, any others? Star Wars.
That's a good one.
Justin Bieber, sorry.
No apologies needed.
So why do we do this? I just wanted to see if people would go along with it. Actually, that was it. No. Probability estimates. Did anybody have 0% as their guess? OK, were you doubting yourself or the person sitting next to you? OK. One of the first times I ever did this exercise, Jamie Dimon was in the audience, and he said 100%. And then he turned to the direct report sitting next to him and said, if you don't get this, you're fired. No, he did not say that. But the guy guessed it right. So I think this is a great exercise because this was a study done right in this backyard at Stanford. And the tappers were asked to estimate, and they thought 50% of people would get it right. So 1 in 2. But then when they tapped, 1 in 40 got it right. 2.5%. So the tappers are all overconfident. Why? Because when you're tapping, it's impossible to do your song without hearing the rhythm in your head. Try it. You can't do it. That makes it also humanly impossible to imagine what your disjointed tapping sounds like to someone who is not hearing it in their head. Right? So I'm hearing da 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 da, and you're hearing, what is that? So long story short, I think this is a great metaphor for communicating original ideas. Because when you are pitching an idea to someone, you are not only hearing the song in your head, you wrote the song. Right? So you have spent weeks or months hearing that tune over and over again, and it's hard to imagine what it sounds like to somebody who's not hearing it. So you have to repeat it a lot. And I'm going to turn this around on you, Sheryl. This is something you do beautifully. You're a big fan of repeating your message, even to the point that people will say things like lean in without quoting you. Does that bother you?
I mean, it's funny, both when I was at Google and when I was at Facebook and at Lean In, there are times when someone will come out with someone, the CEO or someone, and then someone else will quote it, and eventually they stop quoting you. So now, I read in the paper someone's leaning into a taco. I'm thinking, that's terrific. I like tacos too. Not exactly what I meant. Lean in had a specific meaning. But the truth is that if you want ideas out there and other people to adapt them, that is success. Success is when you've put an idea out into the world and other people are quoting it without quoting you because they think it's theirs. And helping people understand that that is success of communication. Success in communication is not being identified with the ideas anymore. It's when those ideas become so widely accepted that they're everyone's.
I think that's such a powerful message. So I go into an organization, and I'm going to go to my boss and be like, you know that idea you shot down 6 minutes ago? Here it is again. Like, how do you think about repeating this when you don't have a platform where you can just naturally speak to different audiences?
I mean, I think for all of us, and I think so many people in this audience have this experience, as you become a manager, as you advocate ideas, however you're going to do it, as an author, as a researcher, as a professor, you really do have to repeat yourself over and over. And you can be bored by your own ideas because you find yourself repeating them, but it is in that repetition. I mean, how do you find that when you're in the class, right? In the classroom, you teach. Students come in year over year. Some of the ideas are the same.
See what you're doing here. Yeah, I find it tremendously repetitive to repeat myself.
Over and over?
And repeat myself. Yeah, no, it is really boring, but the point where I get bored is often the point where students get it, which is why some of them came back, apparently.
So if we're trying to advance ideas, not only do we have to repeat, but managing our own emotions is really hard. And we've all seen this. You've seen the person with an idea that they can't get across that gets frustrated. And we've seen people take very optimistic approaches, maybe to how many people can guess their song, and very pessimistic approaches. If you're trying to convince people of something and manage your own emotions in doing it, trying to put an original idea out there, is it better to be an optimist or a pessimist?
Yes.
Totally cheating.
I think we need a mix of both in the world. The optimist to see the hope for future possibilities, the pessimist to warn us about all the dangers ahead. I think a lot of great originals are skeptical optimists, where they see a tremendous amount of potential, but they're not easily duped or convinced. But there are a lot of great defensive pessimists out there. And I think sometimes you and I are both in this category.
Defensive pessimists?
Yes. So think about, go back to school. About a week before a big test, what are you thinking?
I need to study.
Okay.
What are you thinking?
I'm waking up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, feeling like I am not only going to fail this exam, I'm going to do so badly that my professors are going to take away points on my previous exams. Because they clearly that could not have been me, right? And that anxiety motivates me to prepare and study really hard. And by the time the exam comes around, I do much better than I expected. But the next time, I convince myself, well, this time it's different. I'm really going to fail. And defensive pessimists do just as well as optimists. When they have anxiety up front, that does motivate them to prepare, unless you make them happy. If you put a defensive pessimist in a good mood a few days before a big event, they will bomb because they get complacent. So if you want to sabotage a defensive pessimist, this is the way to do it.
So we're supposed to be negative defensive pessimists.
When you have lead time, you need to motivate yourself to prepare. And then as the event approaches, you want to shift from doom to some degree of excitement.
And this goes to one
Good luck with that.
Yeah, good luck with that. This goes to one of the most interesting things I learned in the book, which is that procrastination can sometimes be good. Now, I found this very upsetting because there's nothing I like less than procrastination. I don't like it on my teams.
I know.
Yeah, you've worked together. You're aware of this. So explain, is procrastination good? Should we procrastinate more? Were you able to procrastinate more writing this book?
I do like the fact that sometimes you respond to emails before I've hit send. I don't know how you do it. I assume there's some technology that Facebook will be releasing soon
Special.
for that. But look, I share your style, right? Like, we're both precrastinators, where we feel this tremendous sense of urgency to start things early and finish them well ahead of schedule. But I did have this student named Jihei who gathered a bunch of data in companies, and we designed some experiments as well, showing that procrastinators are often more creative than precrastinators.
And why is that?
So part of it is incubation, right? If you're quick to start but slow to finish, then you have time for ideas to really develop. And part of it is divergent thinking. If you start right away and you finish in one sitting, you're stuck with a really linear structured plan, right? Like the to-do list and post-it notes that you love so much. But if you can put something away for a few weeks and then come back to it, you get all these unexpected connections you wouldn't have seen before. So I was writing this book, and I was going to do a chapter on procrastinating, and I thought, this is the time to procrastinate. So I procrastinated on the procrastination chapter. Meta-procrastination. It was horrible. It was one of the most painful things I've ever done in my life.
And how do you feel about it? The chapter's great.
It's the best chapter in the book, hands down. Largely to reduce my own cognitive dissonance, right? I have to say that. Like, I hated writing this chapter. But I literally wrote half of it. I stopped in mid-sentence one day, and I put it away until the rest of the book was done, which was months later. But I came back with tons and tons of new ideas, which was great.
So similarly, you've taken a stand recently against a lot of popular ideas, right? Emotional intelligence, Myers-Briggs. Why? What's wrong with emotional intelligence, and what's wrong with Myers-Briggs?
The Myers-Briggs never should have been invented, is the short. No, that's overly harsh.
It's a strong stance.
No,
How many people here have taken Myers-Briggs? How many people have used Myers-Briggs in evaluating something? It's a big stance.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think empirically it's about halfway between a horoscope and a heart monitor. No, I mean, look, the ideas for it were seeded back in the 1920s. Carl Jung invented these 3 categories for understanding differences between people. And then Isabel Myers and Catherine Briggs got together and said, we're gonna try to create an assessment to help people understand themselves. They added a 4th category because they knew someone who didn't fit in the first 3, essentially. And then they basically went commercial with this in the 1950s. And we have a half century of evidence on how to look at personality now, which basically says the way you do science is instead of making these categories up, you go out into the world and you figure out what are the real differences between people that matter, and then you build your frameworks from the ground up. And we have other frameworks that work that way, like the Big Five, Hogan, StrengthsFinder. There are many that are much more valid. So Brian Little, my favorite psychologist, is fond of saying, look, it's not that the Myers-Briggs is fatally flawed. It's just that why would you go and try to turn a Dodge Caravan into a Rolls Royce? So emotional intelligence, you want to talk about that?
Yeah.
I have no strong opinions on the matter. No, I actually, I broke up with the Myers-Briggs a couple years ago, finally, and said that if they wanted me...
How was that? Rough?
I mean, I think it hurt probably them more than it hurt me. But no, look, if they want me back, they need to change too, right? Like, update the data and the theory in light of a half century of evidence, and then we're talking. Emotional intelligence, I think, is similar. I think it's a really important idea. It's one of the things that separates great leaders from good leaders. It's one of the things we all marvel at when we watch you lead. But I think it's been overrated dramatically. If you look at the evidence, it matters about 4 times less than cognitive intelligence. And in fact, a lot of people will say, well, if you're not brilliant intellectually, then emotional intelligence is a substitute. Actually, they're positively correlated. So if you're good at using your brain to reason and do math and solve logic problems, you're also good at using your brain to read people's feelings and to manage your own emotions. So I think we put the cart before the horse a little bit with the data.
So one of the things you talk about in Chapter 7 is on leadership and culture, and I'll share a quote because I think it's really important, particularly with a lot that's going on in our companies and potentially in politics. When a group becomes that cohesive, it develops a strong culture. People share the same values and norms and believe in them intensely. And there's a fine line between having a strong culture and operating like a cult. For nearly half a century, leaders, policymakers, and journalists have accepted the Janus theory of groupthink. Cohesion is dangerous and deadly. To solve problems and make wise decisions, groups need original ideas and dissenting views, so we need to make sure that their members don't get too chummy. But there's just one tiny problem with the cohesion theory. It isn't true. If cohesion doesn't cause groupthink, what does, and how do we stop it?
So I think this is one of those things where when I first started talking about groupthink, the idea that we're all going to get stuck in a majority opinion and not hear dissenting views, people started saying, well, it's got to be cohesion, right? If you like each other too much, you trust each other too much, then you're not going to be willing to listen. And I just wanted to ask people, like, well, who are your friends if they will not ever let you tell them the truth? And when you look at the evidence, cohesive groups are not more likely to fall into this trap. If anything, they're in slightly better shape, right? Because when people trust each other and respect each other, they're willing to listen even if they disagree. Groupthink seems to be caused by 2 major things. One is overconfidence. So when people get too convinced of their own ideas. We saw this in like the Bay of Pigs invasion. We saw this in the NASA Challenger decision. Overconfidence is really deadly. And when you're sure you're going to succeed, you don't question yourself anymore. And then the other factor is reputational concerns. Is it safe to speak up? So groups end up not hearing dissenting views when they feel like they're going to get shut down. I know this is a big, big priority for you. You go out of your way to make sure everyone can speak their mind and tell you the truth. How?
I mean, it's really important at Facebook, and it's been really important to me because at least what I've seen, and you've seen it too, and we've talked about it, is that as people get more senior, there's a lot of people who will tell you exactly what you want to hear. And so if you want them not to, you have to work hard to get there. So let's talk about gender a little bit. which is you and I have written about gender together, and we know that people respond very differently to men and women who speak up with new ideas. And if you're going to be an original, it means you're going to have to convince people of new ideas in the world. What advice do you have for women if it needs to be different, and if so, how?
Having never been a woman, I'm reluctant to give this advice.
But you're a researcher, and you've looked at the data.
Thanks to you. About a year ago, I remember you asking me what my data showed about women and men speaking up, and I had never run the gender analysis, and I had a long flight back to the East Coast. So I spent a bunch of hours reanalyzing the data, and what I found was deeply disturbing, which was consistently, this was true in banks and pharmaceutical companies. When men spoke up, they got rewarded for it. When women spoke up, either they were barely heard and somebody else got credit for their idea, or they were judged as too aggressive. And I was stunned that this still happens in the 21st century in professional organizations. And I went back and reread Lean In, and I think hands down the best advice that I picked up about this comes from you, which is when you're going to present your ideas, it's really important to not seem self-serving, right? And to say, look, here's a suggestion that I think is going to really serve the group in some way. I haven't come across anything more powerful than that, but I'm curious, you advise a lot of women on this. What other guidance can offer on how to speak up?
Well, it goes to the stereotypes of men and women. Men are allowed to be assertive after results, but we expect women to be in service of others. Now, the good news is a lot of our good ideas and original ideas really are in service of others. And so it's important for everyone to present them that way, but actually particularly important for women. All right, I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to do a lightning round, and then we're going to invite questions from the audience, so pass your cards up. And I know this is something that so many people in this audience care about, because we're not just managers and workers and researchers, but we're also parents. And I think all of us want to raise children that won't just follow the group, but will have original ideas. You argue in this book, and there's an incredible, incredible amount of insight here on parenting, that by putting pressure on our children to be high achievers, we actually hurt their success. You have a great quote: "Practice makes perfect, but it doesn't make new." And you write that teachers often stifle originality too. The most creative children are the least likely to become the teacher's pet. What advice do you have for all of us so we nurture our children to think differently and be originals?
Yeah, I think this is hard. So the first thing is it's more about teaching values than it is teaching rules. So I mess this up all the time as a parent, right? Every time our kids misbehave, I don't even have to stop and think. I will hear coming out of my mouth, "New rule!" And then it never gets enforced, right? There's just another new rule the next time they misbehave. And if you look at the data on parents who raise really creative children, what they do is they focus not on, here are the things you need to do to get rewarded or get punished, but rather, here are the principles that we stand for, and let's have a dialogue about why that's important. That's not to say no rules is a good idea, but when you have rules, you have to explain the why behind them. I think the other thing that I really learned is the way that we praise our kids is often backward. So this was eye-opening to me. If you let's say you want your kids to be really generous, I always said, wow, thank you for sharing after our kids shared toys. Turns out you get more of generous behavior if you say thank you for being a sharer. Or not, thank you for giving, but thank you for being a giver. Because you start to internalize that as part of their identity. And next time they have a chance to do that, it's like, oh, well, I'm the kind of person who would be helpful. Works in the domain of cheating, too. So instead of saying don't cheat, you say don't be a cheater. Instead of saying don't lie, you say don't be a liar. And now your behavior casts a shadow. And that makes children feel guilty. And we all know guilt is the gift that keeps on giving. So I think in the domain of originality, what you can do is instead of praising creative artwork, say, wow, you are a creative person. When you have teenagers, instead of saying, you don't have to follow the crowd, you say you are a nonconformist. And they're much more likely then to stand up and say, you know what, it's okay to not be a sheep.
Great advice. Okay, lightning round. These are fast answers, and then we're going to take your questions. Better to be a first mover or late entrant?
Late entrants.
Givers or takers?
Givers.
Favorite internet browser? There's something on this in the book. It's really
Firefox.
Good. If you don't understand that, read the book. You will. Most original thing you've ever done?
Not this answer.
Scariest thing you've ever done?
Hurling myself off a 10-meter platform and somersaulting and twisting.
I'm scared every time I see you do it on YouTube. What did you do last time you got writer's block?
I wrote about something else.
Person living or dead you'd most like to have dinner with?
Abraham Lincoln.
That's a good answer. Favorite original person?
J.K. Rowling.
Favorite magician?
Not David Blaine. No, I would say, ooh, this is tough. Leonard Green.
Superpower you wish you had? And you have a lot of superpowers.
Invincibility.
Last book you read?
TED Talks by Chris Anderson.
Next book on your list?
Never Split the Difference.
Kindle or print?
Depends on whether I'm traveling or at home.
Favorite TV show?
All time or now?
All time.
Seinfeld.
Now.
Can I say Vampire Diaries?
Sure. First thing you do in the morning?
Have our kids trample on me usually.
And say you are a trampler.
No.
Last thing you do at night?
Watch The Flash.
Best piece of advice you've ever received?
I love the advice, don't make the right decision, make the decision right.
That's good advice. All right. Audience questions.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you for submitting these. And okay, what is the biggest mistake people make when trying to be original?
I think the biggest mistake, hands down, is thinking that they have to be crazy risk takers. So I always thought you had to be a daredevil, right? Like one of these people who looks before you leaps. And yet, if you look at the data, one, entrepreneurs are more likely to be risk averse than non-entrepreneurs. Two, successful entrepreneurs are especially more likely to be risk averse than unsuccessful ones. And three, people who quit their day jobs to go in, starting a business full time, are significantly more likely to fail than people who keep their day job and start it on the side.
So this is a fascinating story, and it's one of the things you write about in the book. Tell the story of the investment. That is a great story, and really, I think, very counterintuitive for Silicon Valley. I was very surprised by it.
You really want to go there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
okay. Thanks for reminding me of
It's
it, by
okay.
the way.
You put it in a book
That's
and
true.
in your TED Talk.
I was hoping people would leave it at that. But thank you. No. When I was teaching my first class at Wharton, and this student named Neil came to me and said, I'm going to start a company, and we're going to sell stuff online. And when he told me what the product was, I was like, that's ridiculous. Nobody would ever buy that online. And I asked him a few questions. He had not dropped out of school to start the company. He was not only still in school, but he had lined up a backup job just in case his startup didn't work out, as did his 3 co-founders, so not serious. And then the day before the company launched, there was not a functioning website. And I was like, internet business, you realize the whole company is a website? That's literally all it is? So I passed on the investment, and he ended up naming the company Warby Parker. They sell glasses online. They're worth over $1 billion, and they were just named the world's most innovative company, which is why now my wife handles all our investments.
But this is a great story for
Yeah.
Silicon Valley, because in Silicon Valley, we want people to drop out. We want people to focus. All the legendary stories are the stories of people who left school because they couldn't do anything else but start their company, and this is the opposite of that.
Yeah, I think that's actually terrible advice, right? Because if you look at so many of the people that we've all looked up to and admired, Marcus Persson, 9 months in his day job while Minecraft was taking off. Pierre Omidyar started eBay as a hobby while working as a programmer. Sarah Blakely sold fax machines for 2 years while she was perfecting the prototype for Spanx. I think what I learned from the Warby Parker guys is that to be original, you don't have to be first. You just have to be different and better. And all of the hedging, the risk avoiding that they did allowed them to build their brand right, and they came up with something that was really sophisticated, unique, had no negative associations. But they needed the security of a backup job to do that.
Very counterintuitive. Okay, this is from Nola, who's with the Lean In Foundation. She, very distinctive smiley face here. Adam, you write about the importance of fictional characters as role models. Which fictional character is your role model? It's a great question.
I'm torn between Ender Wiggin from Ender's Game, Hermione Granger from Harry Potter, and Superman, because who doesn't want to be Superman?
And why? Go through them.
So,
A lot of support for Ender's Game here.
So I think, I mean, Ender just, like, it opened up this idea that kids could actually grow up to do great things before even they were adults. And the idea that adults could entrust the future of a planet to a bunch of children, I just think was empowering in a lot of ways as a kid. Hermione, I love the fact that she knows everything. And I think that it would be really cool to be a walking encyclopedia. And Superman, aside from the fact that he's letting a lot of people die while writing newspaper stories, which is not cool, I love the fact that he's just unstoppable.
Why do you think people tend to connect innovation and creativity with youth in our society? Isn't there something to be said for experience and endurance? Good question.
Yeah. I think that one of the reasons we associate creativity and innovation with youth is often the boldest ideas to a new domain come from young people who are outside of it. And they have this experience that we've talked about, which is the opposite of déjà vu. It's called vujade. Vujade is when you see something that you've seen a lot of times before, but all of a sudden approach it with fresh eyes. And it's really hard to do that when you've been entrenched in an industry for 30 years. Right? So like you're standing in line waiting for a taxi, and you see all these like cars passing by that have empty seats. And you suddenly wonder, why can't I have one of those? And Uber is born. Right? How many people have been in that situation and not started Uber? No one from the transportation industry, nobody who worked for a cab company would have thought of that. Right? You had to come from the outside to reject those assumptions. But that's not to say you have to be young to be original. There are these two life cycles of originality that I write about in the book, the young genius and the old master. The young geniuses tend to have these eureka moments when they're fresh to a domain and they get that vujade and they're like, oh, now I can fix this. And then they never have another new idea again, which is sad. But the old masters are much more likely, instead of just come into something fresh, they're likely to run experiments, to tinker. And they're continually learning new things about their domain. And that allows them to maintain their creativity as they age. And I would love to see more people operate that way.
So this is a great question. What advice can you give for dealing with difficult original thinkers? And then the person wrote and crossed out, not Steve Jobs, but people like Steve Jobs.
How do you deal with them?
How do you deal with it? So difficult original thinkers, it's a great question. I mean, lots of industries have their creative geniuses, the people that come up with the great ideas, but are difficult to work with, difficult on their coworkers. Not Steve Jobs, but people like Steve Jobs.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is we have to stop celebrating them for this kind of behavior, right? I think there's so many people who are like, wow, Steve Jobs succeeded because he was often willing to, steal credit for other people's ideas and, kind of trample on other people. And it's like, well, one, how do you know that he succeeded because of those things and not in spite of them? Two, if he hadn't been that way, would he have been kicked out of his own company? And three, if you talk to anyone who worked with Steve Jobs, they will tell you he came back a kinder, gentler Steve Jobs in his triumphant return. So how do you deal with someone when they haven't shifted yet? The best example of this that I have ever seen was in a financial services company about 4 years ago. So this woman named Kathy gets a huge promotion. She's told she's going to co-lead a team with this guy that I'm going to call Colin today, because that's his name. I'm sorry. Kathy is warned by 4 different people, do not trust this guy, Colin. He's going to hog credit for your ideas. He's going to dump all the worst assignments on you. And she does something that few of us have the courage to do, which is in their very first meeting, she says, Colin, I understand we're going to be leading this team together. Just wanted to let you know, this is what I've heard about you. And then she shares all the reputational data. And she says, I don't know whether it's true or not, but I hope it's not true because I don't work well with people who operate that way. And if this is who you are not going to like working with me.
Good for her.
Yeah, amazing, right? So Colin...
That's leaning in. No taco there.
No taco. So Colin, he turns over a new leaf. He shares credit, he mentors, he volunteers for all this grunt work. And I think what Kathy did so beautifully was she called out his reputation and made it transparent to him, and then she invited him to earn a new one. And a lot of difficult people, they simply don't know how they're perceived, and when they come face to face with that, if they're not already in power, they are afraid that it's going to jeopardize their success. Now, that being said, a year and a half later, Colin changed teams and went right back to his old ways. And we've had a little preview of that when she shared the feedback. She said, this is what I've heard about you. And Colin was like, I don't know who you've been talking to, but they're clearly all jealous of me. Like, all right, now we know you're a jerk. But I think helping people see their reputations is often the starting point.
It's really interesting. I talk about this a lot at Facebook about having difficult conversations or hard conversations. And when you think about our colleagues, our coworkers, our family, most people can identify exactly what someone else needs to learn more clearly than they can sometimes about themselves, and then no one tells them. And everyone knows. And if we can find ways to have the hard conversations to say, here's what I've heard, or here's what you can do better, and here's what I need to do better, a lot of organizational failure would go away. Can
I put you on the spot for a second? Because
just did.
You have this remarkable, well, I'm going to do it again then. You have this remarkable ability to give people some constructive criticism and make them feel like they won the lottery. I was just told that my writing was terrible. It's so great. Can you give us some advice about how to deliver that kind of feedback?
I mean, I think the first thing is we need to make it safe for people to deliver hard feedback. So I talk about this a lot at Facebook, and I ask audiences, and I'm going to do it. I'll do it here. Ready? How many people have had what you would consider a difficult conversation, a conversation that needed to happen, where you were telling someone something you didn't think they wanted to hear, but you thought was good for them in the last month? So it's interesting. That's probably, what do you think, 30%? 30%. And then the question is, why not? And so as a leader of an organization, and lots of people here are, how do we make it safe? How do we say, this is something we expect? I think if you look at the history of companies, in the Valley certainly, and I'm sure everywhere, that fail, everyone in the company knows they're failing. They know they're failing, they know how, they know why, they're watching it happen, and they're either not talking about it, or all the junior people are talking about it and not telling the people that are making the decisions. And so if we can have those conversations, we can avoid what are the obvious disasters. And I think it goes to some of the examples you talked about, like NASA. OK, from Spencer, he put his name on it. Is it possible for a conformist or a follower to be an original by emulating originals? Good question.
Yeah, so like you're conforming as a nonconformist, and that makes you a meta-conform. Yeah, I see where this is going. Yes, I think so, because what you're going to emulate often are their behaviors, right, not their ideas. So if you go and say, you know what, I really admire Mark Zuckerberg, so I'm going to build another social network that looks exactly like Facebook, no, right? But if you say, let me study what worked there and apply that to my idea, sure, I think we should all learn from examples of those role models.
Adam, why does it matter what internet browser people use?
Chapter 1, enjoy. No, Michael Hausman did this fascinating study where he got job applicants. He had what browser they used to fill out a job application. It was recorded automatically. And he had about 50,000 people working in customer service and sales kinds of jobs. And he found, some of you are not going to like the results of this study, by the way, but that Firefox and Chrome users performed significantly better in their jobs, and they stayed 15% longer than Internet Explorer and Safari users. So if you want to get better at your job, just change your browser. No. First, we thought it might be a technical advantage, but the groups had similar computer knowledge and typing speed. It was about how they got the browser. Because if you use Internet Explorer or Safari, those came pre-installed on your computer. You just accepted the default that was handed to you. You wanted Chrome or Firefox, you had to just be a little resourceful and wonder, is there another browser out there? And then try to get it. And it turns out a little bit of a window into how people approach their jobs.
Another good question. To what extent do you think our definition of originality is biased by our own cultural worldviews?
A lot. Is there more to the question? No. Yeah, I think it's extremely biased. I think it's so hard to step outside of the culture that you've learned. And I think that some cultures suffer from this more than others. So we have some people in the room who will appreciate this one. It's especially hard to get outside your own worldview if you're highly agreeable. If you're disagreeable and you're constantly in conflict, in fact, extremely disagreeable people experience more joy in an argument than in a pleasant conversation. This is data. Stefan Cote and Debbie Moskowitz showed it. I'm not making this up. If you're in a really agreeable country, you feel like you constantly have to conform to whatever the norms or the cultural values are. So the most agreeable country in the world, anybody know what it is? Shout it out loud. Switzerland? No, that's a good guess. Who said Canada? It is Canada. This will be the last Canada commentary of the evening. But there are a series of independent studies suggesting that Canada is the most agreeable country in the world. And there's a radio station in Toronto that demonstrated this beautifully. So they had this national contest. They said, we don't have enough pride as Canadians. We need more national slogans. So they took as American as apple pie, and they said, let's come up with a Canadian equivalent. So I'm thinking the winning entry is going to be as Canadian as maple syrup or as Canadian as ice hockey. But no, the winning entry is the best demonstration of Canadian agreeableness you will ever see. I kid you not, 4 million Canadians voted for the national slogan, as Canadian as possible under the circumstances. And for anyone who's highly agreeable or slightly Canadian, you get this right away. How could I ever say I'm any one thing when I'm constantly adapting to try to please other people? And I think if that is the culture you come from, you have to work a lot harder to step outside of the worldview that you've been trained in.
So you said that middle managers are most likely to kill ideas. Should we just kill that layer? Kill the middle managers. What do you think of a totally flat organizational chart?
You know, it's fascinating. Larry and Sergey tried in the early days of Google, right? And
I was there for that.
you were there for that.
No, it was an incredible thing. It was my first week at Google, and I was working for Eric, and he was too busy to meet with me for the whole first week. So I had nothing to do for a week. And at the end of the week, he unveiled the org structure change. And the org structure change was everyone reported to Wayne, to one guy. And I thought to myself, how long can that take?
Yeah, I mean, obviously it was
Like 200 people reporting to one
complete
person.
disaster, right? And if there's one way to convince engineers that they need managers, this failed experiment was it. I think more recently, Tony Hsieh has been experimenting at Zappos with this holacracy model, which a lot of other people have tried to copy. And I think there are lots of advantages, there are lots of challenges. My sense is that hierarchy serves a bunch of functions, right? We know that it's efficient and it helps with coordination, to know who has what role and to be aware that even if you haven't met somebody, that they have a certain set of skills, and it's hard to do that if your organization is flat. But I don't think we've gone far enough with the experiment. It's like asking, is there a better system for government than democracy? I don't know, Churchill said it was the best system of government except all others. But how many others have we tried? I think we're too early, and we need more data to figure out if it's possible to be a flat organization and survive and succeed.
And I'm sure there are, and I know there are lots of organizations in Silicon Valley that are trying different org structures, and there's a real desire here for flat org structures.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of that experimentation will come from here.
I hope so, and I think it's easier to pull off if you're a small organization. So like Morningstar, the leading producer of tomato paste, they have this great self-management model where they have a fluid dynamic hierarchy, and whoever's the most knowledgeable about a given topic is in charge at that meeting. And if you have a few thousand people in your organization, that's a lot more attainable than if you have 100,000. So.
I like this question. Do you think confidence plays a big role in being original and speaking up about new ideas? And if so, do you have any advice on how to gain that confidence?
Yes, but I think we mostly have it backward. We think that we have to develop confidence in order to champion original ideas. I think most of the time it works in reverse. You champion original ideas, and that's how you build your confidence. Right? Building confidence from no experience, I think, is hollow. What you want to do is achieve some success, and then know that your confidence is grounded in competence. What you see with a lot of successful originals, I was really surprised, they are full of doubts, just like the rest of us. But there are two different kinds of doubts that keep coming up in this research I've been doing. There's self-doubt and there's idea doubt. Doubting yourself, that is paralyzing, right? You're like, wow, I don't know if I can do this, and you get crippled and you freeze. But doubting your ideas, when you say, I don't know if this works yet, that's energizing. It motivates you to keep refining and keep trying new things. And so, I think a lot of this is about moving from what Carol Dweck would call a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, where you say, look, instead of, wow, this draft that I write is garbage, you say the first few drafts are always garbage, and I'm just not there yet. And by holding out that hope that you can get better, even though you don't have a ton of confidence that this idea is the right one, that's how you succeed with original ideas, and then confidence follows from it.
Last question. I think it's a great one. What are the necessary conditions for original ideas to be adopted? Why are some ideas considered ahead of their time?
All right, I have some thoughts about this, but this connects so nicely to the last question. So when you were thinking about coming forward with Lean In, you've said over and over again that you were afraid. And something gave you the courage to take the leap anyway. What was it? And then to the latter part of the question, how did you know it was the right time?
I didn't know it was the right time. And really, I just felt like things weren't where they needed to be for women. And I actually thought someone else should make these arguments because I didn't really think I had the voice to do it. And then it was a women's bathroom story. A woman named Jennifer followed me into the women's bathroom and said, this is your story and you need to tell it. And she said, no one else had thought to say this, you're waiting around for someone else to write this book and no one else is gonna do it. Because if they were gonna do it, they would have done it and they haven't done it. So stop trying to talk other people into it and get on with it. And I wasn't sure it was the right time, but it really took someone else persuading me.
I feel like you had a much better women's bathroom experience than I did.
It did. Women often have a better experience than women's bathroom. But I think Lean In wasn't ahead of its time. I think Lean In was late, and still is.
Wow, fascinating. Yeah, I mean, but I think there's something to be said for waiting. Right? I think there's so many people who rush in and find that the idea was too early. And look at Cosmo. Right? They could have been Instacart, but they were just a little bit ahead of logistics operations that would make 1 hour delivery possible. Look at, I think that Netflix almost didn't make it because they were so early. And I think that we could all be better served by waiting just a little bit longer. I'd like to see people put an expiration date on their ideas, right? And say, okay, this is something that I really believe in. So maybe 10 years ago, right? Like you were formulating all these lean-in ideas. Say, okay, if I haven't done anything about them by 2015, I'm going to do it. And then you need a partnership with somebody who really cares about you and is willing to extend that date by 1 year, but only 1 year only. And then my hope is by then it's ready, but it's so hard to gauge, right? This is one of the things that drives social scientists crazy, is we wish we knew exactly what the right time was. But I will say the evidence is pretty clear that it's easier to improve on someone else's idea than it is to create something from scratch. So often the right time is to right after somebody has done all the hard work of getting other people used to this idea, and then swoop in and do a much better version of it. Nintendo did this to Magnavox and just destroyed them. When video games were first becoming popular. And Magnavox got people used to the idea of playing video games. And then Nintendo literally became their distributor in one country. They learned all of their habits. And then they said, we can make a much, much better game. And I think that the sad reality is those are most of the organizations and ideas that succeed.
Well, I know you'll all join me in thanking Adam for coming to our hometown. Adam, every time I get to interact with Adam, whether it's in private or on a stage, I learn something. I think your contributions are immense to all of us. Your friendship is deeply appreciated, and I think you're a national treasure. Join me in welcoming Adam.
I'm going to get the last word.
No, you're not.
Thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And
Sheryl, thank you. Please thank both Sheryl and Adam once more, please.
I have to say one other thing.
Well, we're done.
If I can embarrass Sheryl for a second.
This is
no,
over.
we're not done.
It's over. Everyone applauded.
I have spent my whole career studying what it means to be a giver and what it means to be original, and you are the ultimate role model for both of those things. And
Off the
we
stage.
are all grateful for
We're
it.
done.
Thank you.